Before we begin, fairy here doesn't exactly mean the modern winged creature from children's stories. In Scottish folklore, fairy belief could include many different kinds of dangerous beings. Ready? Let's jump in. Baobhan Sìth. On the Highland moors, far from any village where hunting parties sheltered overnight in lonely bothies and shielings, the Baobhan Sìth found its opening. It came because the men asked. Not by name, not knowingly of course, simply by speaking aloud in an isolated shelter that they wished their sweethearts were with them. In one recorded Highland tale, the horror begins with a simple wish. 3 hunters bed down after a poor day's sport. 3 beautiful women appear at the door. The men accept them without question, relieved and grateful. However, one hunter grows uneasy and watches. Blood is moving across the floor towards the fire. He looks down and sees what the firelight had hidden. Where feet should be, there are hooves. Deer hooves. He escapes into the dark. His companions are found the next morning with their throats cut, chests opened, and hearts torn away. Even the creature's name carries a warning. The word Baobh has been connected with older meanings like wicked woman and witch, with darker associations reaching into Irish tradition. That doesn't make the Highland figure an ancient goddess in disguise or anything, but it explains why the deer marker is not a random gothic detail. In Highland fairy logic, the boundary between predatory fairy women and dangerous animal was never a firm one. The Baobhan Sìth sits exactly on that line. Bean-nighe. At the edge of a Highland fjord, where the water runs shallow over stepping stones and the mist sits low before sunrise, the Bean-nighe is already there. She doesn't seek the living out, she simply washes. The shroud moving through her hands belongs to someone who hasn't yet died, and the sound of it against the stones carries further than it should. The old accounts define her function without mercy. She's a fairy woman seen beside a pool or stream, washing the linen of the doomed. Seeing her is confirmation, not even warning, that the death is already decided. One Each-uisge account sharpens the same profile. A young man encounters her on his way to see his sweetheart. She predicts that he will drown at half-tide. He assumes that cleverness can outrun prophecy. But no, it cannot. The mist comes, the fjord rises, and he is lost exactly as foretold. One distinction matters for any careful retelling. The Bean-nighe is not the Caoineach. The Caoineach laments battle deaths, is heard but rarely seen, and can't be approached or questioned. The Bean-nighe belongs to the washing at water complex and can sometimes be captured, bargained with, even made to grant 3 requests. She's not Scotland's banshee, she is older, wetter, and far more specific than that. Redcap. In the south of Scotland, where the border country runs cold and the old tower keeps stand half collapsed against the sky, certain ruins were not considered empty. Border tradition records the belief clearly. Every ruined tower in the south of Scotland was said to have one of this species. Not a Highland creature, not a Gaelic one. The Redcap belongs to the border, to broken stone and abandoned halls, to places where violence had soaked into the walls and never fully left. The strongest named tradition ties the Redcap directly to Hermitage Castle and the Lord Solus cycle. Solus was an evil lord who kept a redcap as a familiar, and the creature granted him a charmed life, proof against ordinary weapons, proof against ordinary bonds. The castle's darkness and Solus's cruelty fed each other, and the redcap sat at the center of both. But immunity built on supernatural terms always contains its undoing. The prophecy that finally broke Solus was not a sword or a siege, it was 3-fold ropes of sifted sand. Once those conditions were met, even the Redcap's protection collapsed, and Solus was boiled to death at the 9-stane rig. The sand ropes are the detail worth keeping because they show exactly how Scottish tradition imagined that even the darkest bargains have a limit built into them from the start. Selkie. Off the rocky skerries of Orkney and Shetland, where the Atlantic breaks against stone and the horizon offers nothing but open water, the Selkie tradition took its strongest shape. Not as a mainland fairy of the hearth or hill, but as something stranger. A sea being who could cross into human life, but never fully belong to it. One of the oldest surviving ballads makes that geography clear from the first line. The great Selkie of Sluagh opens without ceremony. A woman with a nameless child is visited in the night by the child's father. He announces himself directly, a man upon the land, a Selkie in the sea, with his dwelling fixed at Sluagh. He pays her gold, claims the son, and before he leaves, delivers a prophecy without comfort. She will marry a proud gunner, and that gunner's first shot will kill both father and child. There is no rescue in this story, no transformation into something human and permanent. The Selkie returns to the sea, and the child goes with him. And the prophecy moves toward its end like an unstoppable tide. The oldest Scottish Selkie tradition is not simply a romance or anything, it's a kinship tragedy built around mixed descent, a claimed child, and a death that was always coming. Brownie. And no, not the tasty one. In the farmhouses and byres of Scotland, long before the hearth went cold each night, something else was already at work. The brownie needed no invitation. It belonged to the household the way that smoke belonged to the hearth, rarely seen but woven into the life of the place. In Scottish tradition, the brownie drank the milk left for it, straightened what disorder had spoiled, and tied the cattle safely before dawn. No one saw it. No one needed to. It took no payment and tolerated no interference. Dirt left overnight was an insult. A dog loose in the house could be a provocation. Old accounts record brownies that struck offenders in the dark, punished dogs left loose inside the house, and overturned what a careless household left undone. Helpful, yes, but helpful the way a storm is helpful when it floods an enemy's field. The clothing dismissal is the oldest trap in its tradition. Leave a cloak, a hood, or a pair of trews beside the hearth as a gift, and the brownie departs forever. Not ingratitude, in offense. The gift implies that it's a servant. It was never a servant. It was something older, stranger, and far less obedient than that. Kelpie. Not every dangerous thing in Scottish water tradition lives in a loch. The Kelpie belongs to streams and torrents, to the fast-moving water that cuts through farmland and drives mill wheels and runs high after rain. This distinction matters. The Kelpie and the water horse are not the same creature. Treating them as interchangeable names creates mistakes almost immediately, and you want to get your Scottish fairies right. In the older evidence, the Kelpie is not primarily the shape-shifting horse that lures riders into still, deep water. That is actually the territory of the Each-uisge. The Kelpie is a torrent being, associated with swelling burns, interference with mill wheels, and harm to women and children caught near fast-moving water. Its danger begins with the water itself before it even becomes monstrous. It belongs to the working landscapes of streams and crossings, not to the open, lonely loch. In these stories, water is not just scenery, it is a threshold, and the horse is what carries people across it. That framework holds for the Kelpie too, but the threshold here is not the deep loch's edge. It is the fjord, the footbridge, the mill race, the burn running fast after a night of rain. The Kelpie is what waits in the water that ordinary life cannot afford to avoid. Each-uisge. In the Highland interior, where freshwater lochs sit dark and still between the hills and no road runs close to the shore, almost every lonely loch was believed to have one. The old accounts establish the baseline clearly. The Each-uisge resembled an ordinary horse. It moved between lakes, mixed with farm horses in the pasture, and waylaid travelers who had stayed out too long. Nothing about its appearance announced what it was, and that was kind of the point. But each Each-uisge was not only an animal threat. A Lewis tale adds a detail that changes the creature's profile entirely. In that story, each Each-uisge appears in human form, visits two women repeatedly at their shieling, and only gradually reveals its nature through escalating violence. First unsettling, then openly predatory, killing and carrying off cattle before witnesses finally confirmed what had been living among them. A specialist archer is sought, one who has killed Each-uisge before, because ordinary means will not serve. That human form variation is the Each-uisge's most dangerous aspect and its most important distinction from the Kelpie. The Kelpie belongs to working water, streams, torrents, mill races. The Eich-uisge belongs to stillness, to the isolated loch, the empty shieling, the creature that passes for a neighbor until it does not. The threshold is the line between the neighbor at your door and the thing wearing his face. Sluagh. The Sluagh does not haunt a single place the way the Redcap haunts a ruin's tower, or wait beside a particular fjord the way the Bean-nighe waits. It moves, it fills the air. A late 17th century account records that Highlanders distinguished between the earthly host and the fairy host, Sluagh Sarota and Sluagh Sìth. It also preserves the belief that souls dislodged from the body could pass into the sheath. That connection between the fairy host and the restless dead is older and stranger than any modern shorthand captures. A later Hebridean collection preserves the aerial dimension in sharper detail. The Sluagh moves with the grey west wind. It fights in midair. When someone lies dying, precautions are taken around west-facing doors and windows because the host travels from that direction and the threshold between life and death is exactly where it operates. These beliefs were recorded from Hebridean tradition, not as a neat literary monster tale, but as a mix of stories. The temptation in any script is to call the Sluagh Scotland's wild hunt, or to flatten it into the unseelie host as if those were always the same thing in native usage. But no, they were not. The strongest source-backed description is simpler and darker than any tidy taxonomy allows. A hostile aerial multitude, associated with the dead, moving on the west wind toward the dying. Scotland's fairy tradition saved its most formless terror for the sky. Oof, those were a bunch of doozies right there. If you enjoyed these myths, check out the next story on screen. It is just as unbelievable and just as cool. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you there.